We now begin the second half of the semester, in which we'll be taking a look at applying the moral theories that we learned about in the first half of the semester onto actual ethical issues. The very first issue that we're addressing is in this lecture, the issue of abortion.
Okay, I know many of you are pre-nursing or nursing students, and I'm not going to pretend to know more about the hard science of biology than you do. I certainly do not. So if that's an area of expertise for you, please go up on your knowledge. But I do need to cover a little bit of the science here as it relates to the ethical issue of abortion for those who may not have the science background that I know many of you have. Uh, Biologically, this issue of abortion comes down to the issue of human life. For those who are considered pro-lifers, human life begins at conception. For those who are pro-choicers, this is usually described as a potential for human life. So whichever side one is on, this process begins when a zygote is formed, when a sperm cell joins with an ovum, makes its trip down the fallopian tube, and if one is hoping to have a baby, then the hope would be that the zygote implants itself into the uterine wall. That zygote grows rapidly and becomes a collection of cells called a blastocyst, and then most scientists will refer to this organism as an embryo for the very first 8 weeks. And after 8 weeks all the way to the time of birth, typically around week 40, the name given is a fetus. The textbook made mention of quickening and viability. For the sake of our class, viability is really far more the important term. Quickening deals with when the mother can begin to feel the fetus moving in her womb. But again, as far as the ethical implications goes, viability very important, because viability pertains to when scientists and doctors believe that the fetus would be able to live outside of the mother's womb. Of course, the earliest viability is much more risky, and certainly the later one goes much more potential for that life to be viable outside the mother's womb. Your textbook, which is very close to what I've heard in the past, puts viability at 23 to 24 weeks. What I'd heard in the past was 25, so we're all right there in the same ballpark. Okay, there are different methods of abortion. If the pregnancy is in its very earliest stages and a woman wants to abort, oftentimes a pill form of abortion would be the choice. Another form of abortion early in the pregnancy is when the embryo is still very small. A syringe can be used to remove the embryo. However, once the embryo or fetus is too large for a syringe evacuation, different sizes of suction tubes will be used to extract the embryo or fetus. And then also late-term abortions, which you all probably know that pro-lifers refer to late-term abortions as partial birth abortions. Late-term abortions must often utilize a saline injection to engender contractions within the uterus. Again, that's late-term abortions. Okay, pictured here we have a teenage girl who is a pro-lifer with tape over her mouth saying that the law in Roe versus Wade, which allows abortion, that she has been silenced. Her voice is not heard. Nonetheless, she still has the word life written on this tape. All right, the primary difference between non-consequentialist or deontological moral theories about abortion center around the answer to this question. When does life begin? For those who tend toward a pro-life position, life begins at conception. For those who tend toward a more pro-choice position, life begins at birth. Pro-life moral theories firmly believe that life does begin with conception, and therefore abortion is equated with murder, because this is an innocent life, an actual life that's being taken. Now this question, when does life begin, is only important for those who have their moral theory grounded in the non-consequentialist approach. If you were to look at a consequentialist, such as utilitarian ethics, you would see the focus is not on this question of life, but on the consequences of the pregnancy. A pro-life utilitarian would likely focus on what would be the happiest consequence or the best benefits that could come out of this pregnancy. And one that is often raised by a pro-life utilitarian is adoption. That you have many young couples that perhaps cannot have a child of their own and therefore would like to adopt, and so that could be a happy consequence of an unwanted pregnancy rather than abortion. Okay, and as we look at pro-choice moral theories, we see that there are both liberal and moderate pro-choicers. More liberal pro-choicers believe that life does not begin until birth, but you have moderate pro-choicers that will point to viability. Again, just to make sure you got that definition, viability, that point when the fetus could be able to live on his or her own outside of the mother's womb. Focus within the pro-choice camp will focus on the rights that women have over their bodies, as you can see pictured here. My mind, my body, my choice. It shouldn't be a legislative body that tells a woman what she can do with her very own body. And by the way, let me pause for just a moment to point out a place where I disagree with your author. You may agree with him, of course, that's certainly fine, but he made it seem like an easy separation between the moral argument and the legal argument here. And I do think the two are so intertwined that it is hard to make that distinction as firmly as he did. And here's what I mean by that. I know individuals who are very much pro-choice, but on a moral or ethical level, they believe abortion to be wrong. So morally, their moral theory is that of pro-choice, but their moral theory is that of pro-life. They think abortion is wrong. But when it comes to the legal aspect of this, they are pro-choice because of the respect they have for a woman having control over her own body. So I hope you all can understand that difference there, and I did not see your author bring that out. If he did, I completely missed it. But here one, morally or ethically, is pro-life, but as moderate, not wanting legislators to tell women what they can and can't do with their body, remains pro-choice. And then there are some utilitarian pro-choice theories that address concerns of overpopulation and that abortion could be a good means of establishing population control. You see there, once again, with the utilitarian approach, the focus is very much on the consequences of the pregnancy and not the question of when life begins. And so in a nation such as China, which has laws now that a family can only have one child, and in China, with the patriarchal culture, the desire is very much that that one child would be a son. So oftentimes, a Chinese couple has a baby, and it is a daughter. That child will be abandoned on the streets. They're making no claim to that child, and therefore they will try to have another child, hope it will be a son. And so a utilitarian looking at this issue would say, we have children being abandoned out in the street. This does not need to be the case. We could have abortion take place and unwanted pregnancy eliminated. Now, of course, that would get really complicated because this would become more of a late-term abortion because the gender of the child would have to be identified before the couple would know if they wanted an abortion or not. And boy, that just brings in a whole other set of ethical questions about population control and its rightness or wrongness, and also the misogyny that is involved in this issue. Should abortion come in only when gender is determined? I think a lot of people would see something problematic there. So realize as we go through the rest of this semester, as we look at these individual ethical concerns and dilemmas, they do not exist in a vacuum all by themselves, but are oftentimes intertwined with many other ethical issues.